Hi everyone, Susan Storm here. I'm a certified MBTI practitioner and the founder of PsychologyJunkie.com. And today we are going to dive into the ENTP personality type. We're going to look at what those letters mean and what their cognitive functions are. Let's go ahead and get started. First, let's look at the E in ENTP. The E in ENTP stands for extrovert. Extroverts get their energy from interacting with the world around them. This could be great conversations with people, or it could be an activity that they're interested in. They want to be out there exploring and interacting with the world. Next, let's look at the N in ENTP. That stands for intuitive. Intuitives are interested in things that are abstract, concepts, ideas, theoretical possibilities, hypotheses. Next, let's look at the T in ENTP. That stands for thinking. Thinking types like to look at situations and make decisions by focusing primarily on logic. They tend to step out of their feelings so that they can look at situations as objectively and unbiasedly as possible. And the P in ENTP stands for perceiving. Perceiving types like having an open-ended exploratory approach to life. They like being spontaneous, flexible, having things fairly unstructured so they can be free to follow their interests and their insights and their ideas. They don't like having a lot of structure. They don't like having a really regimented, rigid routine. All right, so we've gone over the letters, but that's really just scratching the surface of what it means to be an ENTP. Now we are going to dive into those cognitive functions. If you're not sure what the cognitive functions are, they're essentially the mental tools you use as you're observing the world, taking in information, and making decisions. We all use all the cognitive functions, but we have a preference for four. These four cognitive functions are conscious to us. We have conscious control over them, and they feel more natural for us to use. For ENTPs, their dominant cognitive function is called extroverted intuition, or NE for short. What is the dominant function? Before we get into explaining NE, I want to explain what the dominant function really is. The dominant function is the function that comes most naturally to you. It tends to be the function that you live and breathe without really having to put a lot of conscious energy into it. When you're using your dominant cognitive function, you tend to feel energized and inspired. It doesn't take a lot of energy or work to use it. It feels very easy, and you tend to feel very certain of your capability in your dominant function. So for ENTPs, that dominant function is extroverted intuition, or NE. What is that? NE is all about exploring hypothetical possibilities, ideas, and connections. It can find relationships between things that other people miss. It can brainstorm 12 different ideas to do one thing rather than doing it the traditional tried and true way. Extroverted intuition is interested in potential more than it's interested in what currently exists right now. Instead of just working with what they know, an ENTP is interested in breaking new ground, trailblazing new paths, which is why I've given them the nickname the Trailblazer. ENTPs are amazing at spotting patterns, spotting connections, spotting possibilities that other people miss. When there's a problem and all the usual solutions are failing, then you need an ENTP there to think outside the box and come up with a new method, a new way to try something. Here's a quote from Carl Jung, who is in many ways the father of psychological type. This is what he said about extroverted intuition. Because he is always seeking out new possibilities, stable conditions suffocate him. He seizes on new objects or situations with great intensity, sometimes with extraordinary enthusiasm, only to abandon them cold-bloodedly without any compunction and apparently without remembering them as soon as their range is known and no further developments can be divined. These tend to get really frustrated when life seems very monotonous and there's a lot of sameness for them. When everything's very routine and rigid and predictable, they like to be exposed to new situations, to new environments, new people. This sparks their extroverted intuition. They're naturally excited about adapting, about growing, about dealing with unknowns. Like Jung said, they seize on new objects or situations with great intensity. ENTPs are interested in exploring the new, the as yet never discovered, the as yet never created. They want to do things that have never been done, make discoveries that have never been made. Because of this, they tend to dislike being tied down to very traditional roles or traditional structures. Many times they're their own bosses. They often have a very entrepreneurial spirit. Many times they enjoy moving from place to place to experience different cultures or different lifestyles, different scenery. Some ENTPs can be very stable in their jobs or their relationships, but they have to have a constant influx of new challenges and new ideas and new insights for it to be exciting. For example, you could have an ENTP who's very happy in a science-based research job because they're constantly exploring and testing new theories. And they're able to really engage that extroverted intuition in the process. Whereas if it was an ENTP who was working, say, a bank job and they were doing the same exact tasks every day, they'd probably be very bored and feel very unfulfilled in that position. And the same goes for relationships. ENTPs and all perceiving types tend to have a reputation or a stereotype for being non-committal. But ENTPs who can be in a relationship with a person who challenges their thinking, who loves a good debate, who is interested in exploring ideas with them or new experiences, can be very happy in that relationship. Now, that doesn't mean that an ENTP needs to be with someone who's exactly like them. I've seen many ENTPs who are very happy in relationships with opposite types, but they need to be with someone who's at least interested and excited about those things with them and is able to join them on their journeys, on their explorations and their ideas, be able to listen to them, and maybe offer a contrasting point of view that would simultaneously be interesting to them. Extroverted intuition is the dominant function of people like Steve Wozniak or Walt Disney. It's the function of people who really change the world and create things that no one could have ever imagined before. So some of the strengths of extroverted intuition are being able to find solutions that are very original outside the box when the normal solutions have failed. Flexibility. ENTPs can be very flexible when plans change, when a crisis happens, when they have to alternate very quickly and unexpectedly. These types tend to do that very well. In fact, they might find it exciting and fun rather than a challenge. Extroverted intuition is also really good at seeing relationships and connections between things. If you can imagine a TV show with a detective who can spot these clues and see how two things are connected where nobody else could, an ENTP has that same capability in many ways, where they can see how one thing relates to another thing that another person might look at and see as being completely unrelated and completely different. Now, because ENTPs are dominant extroverted intuitives, they can also lean into it too heavily and become too extreme in their tendencies. This is a weakness of all the personality types where they can, because their natural comfort zone is their dominant function, they can lean way too much into that at the expense of their other functions. Now, what happens when an ENTP is leaning way too far into extrovert intuition is they become very scattered. They're so interested in exploring new possibilities and brainstorming new paths, they don't stick with anything. They get to the actual work of starting their project and trying to make it come to fruition. They get bored and they start thinking of a bunch of other new ideas. And so they leave dozens of half-finished projects in their wake and they have a really hard time getting anywhere. That's a sign of unhealthy or warped or overextended extroverted intuition. Another downside of leaning too heavily in extroverted intuition is that it can mean that you become out of touch with the sensing side of yourself in a way that could be unhealthy. Like you might chase after all these exciting possibilities, but forget to drink water or forget to get enough sleep or forget to eat, or perhaps you mindlessly eat while you're chasing new possibilities and you don't even think about it. So physical neglect can be a sign that someone is leaning too heavily into extroverted intuition. Another sign that you're leaning too heavily into extrovert intuition is that you keep repeating the same mistakes. The sensing side of the ENTP is good at remembering experiences and gleaning wisdom from them and then using that gleaned wisdom in the future. If you have an ENTP who is leaning too much into extrovert intuition, they have a hard time remembering the mistakes that they've made or the lessons that they've learned. They don't sit long enough with a bad experience to learn what they could glean from that. And so they keep repeating the same mistakes over and over again because they're just not slowing down enough to process what's causing those mistakes to happen in the first place. Another sign of leaning too heavily into extroverted intuition is that you might become too risk prone. ENTPs tend to love new challenges and they tend to not be really that afraid of risk. And when this gets taken to an unhealthy degree, then they tend to very much miscalculate risk and do things that have negative consequences in the future. That said, this is still their strongest function. This is still a strength for them. They enjoy exploring things no one else has explored before. These are the people that can help you out when you're stuck and you don't know what to do and the rule book is not helping you. These are the people who can dream up revolutionary inventions that completely change the world. These are people who are not only inventive and ingenious, but they can also be very friendly and they can help distill information in very digestible ways that people can understand in a way that many other types might struggle to do. Next, let's look at the ENTP's auxiliary function. This is called introverted thinking, or TI for short. Introverted thinking is all about understanding the components of how something works, understanding all the little nuts and bolts. Now, because ENTPs have introverted thinking paired with extroverted intuition, they tend to be interested in how ideas and theories and intangible concepts work, more so than like a car engine or a piece of hardware. This isn't to say that no ENTPs are interested in those things, many are, but for the most part, they're going to apply introverted thinking to theories, concepts, ideas, and possibilities more so than concrete objects. So, introverted thinking helps ENTPs to make sense of the world through logical analysis. It's all about understanding the underlying principles and structures of an idea or a system. It goes very deep. In order to understand it fully, I want to contrast it with extroverted thinking, which is the process that TJ types use. TJ types are primarily interested in information that's usable. They're interested in information that they can then apply to the world outside them in some productive way. Introverted thinking, in contrast, is interested in understanding how something works for its own sake. I was just speaking to an ENTP the other day who learned everything they could about airplanes and airplane engines and how they're constructed, the different types of airplanes throughout history. They weren't interested in flying an airplane. They weren't going to go get their license in flying an airplane. They weren't going to do anything like that or become a pilot. They just liked learning about it for its own sake. And they like to think about where the future of aviation could be. And you'll often find that with thinking, perceiving types. They like learning just because it's interesting to learn. And when they're interested in something, they will learn everything they can about it, all the nuts and bolts. They will know it inside out. Coherence and accuracy and thoroughness is really important for introverted thinking. It doesn't want to know just enough to do something with it. Introverted thinking wants to know everything it can about a subject, and when it comes to their beliefs on life, their philosophies on life, they tend to be very skeptical. They can poke holes in just about anything because they can find logical discrepancies super quickly. They can find logical inconsistencies really fast. And so when they're trying to decide whether to believe in a particular religion or a particular philosophy on life or a particular rule, they will question it and question it and question it until there's nothing left, which usually doesn't happen. Usually there are continued questions. And so often it's easier for ENTPs to understand what they don't believe or what they don't think is true than to clarify what they do think is true, because there are so many questions that they can apply to something. For this reason, they usually enjoy debates and arguments where they can exercise that introverted thinking and they can point out the flaws in a particular piece of logic or a societal rule that most people believe. The process of having a friendly debate about this or a friendly argument is really exciting and it's invigorating for them because it's not only using their introverted thinking, but it's also using their extroverted intuition because they're able to brainstorm new ways of seeing something and new angles that they can come at a problem. That said, in my experience, many ENTP females have been conditioned socially and culturally to suppress that side of themselves. Many ENTP females have been chastised growing up about their argumentative nature. They've been told it's not right. They've been expected to lean more heavily into a feeling female role because that's the tradition. There are more feeling females out there in the world than there are thinking females, and there is a social pressure for all thinking females to act a certain way, to suppress their thinking side because it's seen as perhaps not feminine or not polite or not nurturing. We ascribe this kind of argumentative, truth-seeking, more blunt nature to being male more so than we do to being female. And so many ENTP women that I've spoken with, they enjoy these arguments, they would enjoy having these debates, but they've learned for many years to suppress that part of themselves because they've been told one way or another that's not the way they're supposed to be. Because introverted thinking is the auxiliary function for ENTPs, this tends to be the way that they want to help other people. Your auxiliary function for all 16 personality types tends to be the way that you want to reach out and help and support others. So for ENTPs, they enjoy helping others by distilling information in a way that brings clarity to another person. They might help out through troubleshooting, through clarifying information so that people can understand it and use it, intellectually liberating other people, letting them know about biases in their beliefs or inaccuracies of beliefs that are holding them back, helping people to have more cohesion and confidence in what's true rather than following something that is riddled with logical inconsistencies. So when you're with an ENTP and you feel like they're arguing with you and trying to dismantle something you believe, or they're trying to clarify something to you and you feel like it's condescending or they're being a know-it-all or they're being insensitive, remember that introverted thinking is their helping function. So they're literally trying to nurture you and care for you and show you that they care through this process. If you're someone that's in their inner circle, if you're someone that they care about, this is how they're probably going to try to show it. Many times it's very frustrating, particularly again, more so with ENTP women. It's very frustrating because they're trying to show they care. They're trying to support their relationships by clarifying information, giving new insights, pointing out a flaw in someone's logic or a kink in their reasoning. And you're doing this because you genuinely care about the other person and you want them to have clear, clean thinking so that they can make better decisions for themselves. And instead of that being taken in a positive light or seen as being given from a place of care and concern or even love, most people just see it as the ENTP being argumentative or snarky or disrespectful or insensitive. And so this is one of the trials that ENTPs often face throughout their lives, particularly in childhood when they are often told to just follow the rules, don't question, or they're told things like, because I said so. And that brings us next to the tertiary function of the ENTP, which is called extroverted feeling, or FE for short. Extroverted feeling is all about connecting with others, understanding the emotional wavelengths, getting into a positive vibe with other people, being able to read people's emotions and respond appropriately. This function comes to the aid of the ENTP in many situations because, like I said, they have a tendency to be blunt. They have a tendency to be very truth-telling, and sometimes that doesn't go over the way that they want it to. So many ENTPs use extroverted feeling to read how someone is responding to them and alter the way that they say something so that it will land in a more effective way and it won't create a lot of disharmony and hurt feelings. ENTPs can actually be very good at reading the room, at reading people's feelings, at making the perfectly timed joke so that people laugh when a situation is tense rather than the situation getting worse and worse. Extroverted feeling can help ENTPs to soften their approach, allowing them to consider the emotional impact of their words and their actions. It also helps them to build up harmonious relationships and make friends and interact easily and quickly. Another quality of extroverted feeling is that it's focused on other people's moods and emotions and societal values. Because of that, extroverts tend to know how they should appear or how they should act in any situation, especially as they reach adulthood, and this function gets stronger and stronger. That said, it's still not the ENTP's most preferred way of existing. They would rather be exploring new insights and possibilities via extroverted intuition or breaking down a concept logically via introverted thinking than they would be just like sharing their emotions with other people. That said, extroverted feeling is still a way that they like to connect with other people, and it is also a way that they like to be taken care of. According to John Beebe, who is a Jungian scholar and a psychoanalyst, the tertiary function, which is extroverted feeling for ENTPs, is the way that we want to be supported. And how this can show up is that ENTPs, when they're having a rough day or a hard time, might enjoy venting their feelings out to someone else. They might find relief and support when someone just listens to them and affirms their feelings and validates what they're going through and helps them to understand their feelings, because honestly, many times ENTPs struggle to understand what's going on for them emotionally on their own. They often have to write out their feelings or talk them out in order to make sense of them. Introverted feeling, which is the process that feeling perceiving types use, is much more capable of understanding all the nuances and nooks and crannies of one's own personal emotions, whereas ENTPs with extroverted feeling are more conscious of other people's feelings, and then when they are going through something emotionally, it's harder for them to pinpoint what it is. It can feel very confusing and overwhelming to them. So ENTPs do like having a partner or a really good friend who can be a listening ear when they're going through something emotionally, who can provide empathy, who can sound back what they're saying and be like, this sounds like you're saying that you feel this way and this way, because it helps the ENTP to understand their own feelings and it helps them to feel supported and cared about. Extroverted feeling also gives ENTPs their quintessential playfulness and charm. If we think of ENTPs, one of the most famous versions of an ENTP that I know is Robert Downey Jr. If you ever watch videos with Robert Downey Jr. or even watch him in Iron Man, he's full of charm and he's extremely funny and he's very responsive to people. He's not only friendly, he's a little bit irreverent and he's extremely playful. He seems in many ways like a big kid, but he's also very smart. And this is what you'll find with ENTPs is that tertiary extroverted feeling tends to give them this really charming, playful, charismatic energy. They enjoy rubbing shoulders with people, teasing other people, making the right jokes. And part of that is because the tertiary function is another word for that is the child function, and John Beebe calls it the eternal child. And so when someone is using their tertiary function, they often have kind of a childlike, playful, creative, whimsical energy to themselves when they're using their tertiary function. In the same way, that tertiary function can be vulnerable, and when you mess up with it, you can feel really ashamed or embarrassed. So if an ENTP makes a social faux pas or embarrasses themselves, or someone else that they care about embarrasses themselves socially, or upsets the harmony and makes everything awkward, that can feel really vulnerable and embarrassing for an ENTP because that tertiary function of extroverted feeling is being impacted, and it has a more childlike vulnerability to it as well. All right, lastly, let's look at the ENTP's inferior function, which is called introverted sensing, or SI for short. Introverted sensing is very much focused on recalling past experiences and the wisdom or the lesson in those past experiences. It also makes someone more aware of their inner body sensations. It's interested in routine, in recalling lessons from the past, in maintaining traditions, and having a sense of stability and predictability in life. Now, ENTPs, because they have inferior or introverted sensing, tend to feel a little bit uneasy about this function rather than sticking with the tried and true way or following a predictable routine or having a very stable life. They tend to keep chasing new ideas, new theories, new adventures. They like dealing with unknowns. They like exploring possibilities and dealing with theoretical queries and hypotheses, much more so than dealing with concrete things. Let me think of an example. So I have a lot of SJs in my extended family. And when we get together for, say, Thanksgiving or family dinner, they're interested in talking about concrete things, how they work. We literally spent, I think, 30 minutes one day with everyone comparing the different types of bell peppers and which ones were best and which grocery stores were the best to get them at, and the family recipes that have been handed down from the past and using bell peppers in these particular casseroles or stir fries. So the conversation about concrete things and concrete specifics is something that introverted sensing types really enjoy. However, if you were an ENTP at that conversation, you might find yourself rolling your eyes or trying not to fall asleep because there's nothing intangible about bell peppers. Knowing the ins and outs of bell peppers is not going to help you make some brilliant new discovery. Unless, you were going to talk about how you took apart a bell pepper in a lab and found out that it might have potential healing properties that no one had ever discovered before. But if you're just talking about what are the best varieties of bell peppers, what's the best store to get them, what's the best recipe to use, this is all extremely concrete and it's all extremely detailed and concrete, and therefore it tends to be pretty uninteresting to an ENTP type. In the same way, waking up and following the same routine every day tends to be very uninspiring for an ENTP. Now, sometimes ENTPs are a bit jealous of people who do have this preference because they just seem to have these very stable, consistent, calm, careful lives. ENTPs love the fact that they can trailblaze new paths and do new things, but of course, there's some downside to that they do experience. It can be that they might have a lot of stress because everything's always changing and they take more risks. They might face financial issues because when you're not really consistent and stable and you pick up and move from one place to another, it costs a lot of money. You might have more health issues because you're not as conscious of your bodily needs in the moment. So there is a part of the ENTP that does wish it was really good at introverted sensing. I know an ENTP who says they secretly wish they could be this really like boring, stable, predictable person because it would have helped them to avoid a lot of the struggles that they have faced in life. But at the same time, they just can't be that way because it would be a betrayal to themselves. They just could not force themselves to do it. That said, when ENTPs are interested in something, they often learn all the facts about it that they can. And they often have special activities or routines that they do like to revisit again and again and again. I know an ENTP who goes to Disney World every single year and knows everything he can about Disney World, and that gives him a lot of joy. Introverted sensing does have kind of a nostalgic quality to it. So you often will find that ENTPs do have a few very nostalgic, sentimental things that they revisit again and again because introverted sensing is all about finding something meaningful or personally enjoyable and going back to it and preserving that tradition and making it a routine and repeating it over and over, which is why you'll find that SJ types watch and rewatch the same movies or read and reread the same books. You might find that similarly with ENTPs, where they have a few special things that they repeat over and over again, and that satisfies that introverted sensing inferior function, but it's not the way they live every aspect of their life by any stretch of the imagination. Because introverted sensing is inferior, sometimes ENTPs can struggle to keep track of details. They can struggle to prioritize their physical well-being and comfort. They can struggle to remember past experiences specifically and what they learned from them because their minds are wired to constantly be hypothesizing about the future more so than recalling the past or preserving it. Sometimes what can happen with ENTPs is they lean so much into extroverted intuition anytime a problem comes up in life, they overuse it so much to the point of exhausting it. So imagine that you have an ENTP who's dealing with a lot of stress. Their job, they're having issues with their job. Maybe they just got fired. And so they're trying to figure out a way to deal with that. They're trying to brainstorm new possibilities. Their mind is constantly rattling off possibilities and ideas of ways they could make enough money to support their family or look for a new job. At the same time, they're dealing with emotional issues at home because their wife is stressed about their job, or they don't know if they're going to have money to pay for their kids' classes or medical treatments. And so they're trying to rattle off more and more and more hypothetical ways to deal with it using extroverted intuition. So they're leaning really hard on extroverted intuition as their life is getting increasingly stressful. What can happen in these situations is that they can overuse extroverted intuition to the point where it exhausts itself. And when extroverted intuition exhausts itself, what happens is the inferior function rises up and takes the wheel. And when that happens, ENTPs experience what's called grip stress. Grip stress for an ENTP is when introverted sensing is now in charge. They've worn out their other functions and now their inferior function is taking over. So when ENTPs are really stressed, one of the things that they tend to do is become obsessed with details. Normally, they're very big picture people. They're not as focused on the details, but when they're in grip stress, suddenly they become hyper fixated on the details. They've developed tunnel vision for specific details. They could become immersed and obsessed with busy work and tasks, trying to get every detail in their life in order, and sometimes to no point whatsoever. They're just getting a lot of busy work done in hopes that it will solve something, but it's not actually solving anything. They might also become hyper aware of their body or their physical states. Suddenly, a headache that they wouldn't have noticed a week ago feels they're hemorrhaging, or they're having this, they worry that it could be some life-threatening illness. They become hyper aware of all the discomforts and aches and pains in their bodies. One of the important things to do if you're an ENTP and you are in the grip of this kind of stress is to actually pause and take care of your body instead of getting fixated on fixing every little detail because it won't work. You won't be able to fix it all. Try to become conscious of how you physically feel and take care of it. So you're tired, take a nap, make sure you're getting a drink. Take some time to breathe deeply. That can immediately help to regulate your nervous system. Do something called the 4-7-8 breathing method, where you inhale for 4 seconds, hold your breath for 7 seconds, and then exhale for 8 seconds. Do this 5 or 10 times. Try to focus on that deep breathing to regulate your nervous system, to regulate your body so you're not feeling as stressed. Take some time to take care of your senses. whether that's taking a warm bath, getting some rest, eating a healthy meal, or even just doing some light, low intensity exercise. When you're in the grip of introverted sensing, instead of feeling like you've got to file all your taxes right now or clean every nook and cranny of your desk drawer, try to take that time to actually take care of and preserve your senses, because ENTPs by nature are not super conscious of their senses. They're not super conscious of how they feel and taking care of that. And so when you're really stressed as an ENTP, that's a sign that you need to slow down and take care of your body and your physical senses. Another thing you often need as an ENTP is to get away from people, to get away from the pressure of trying to deal with other people's feelings about something. Getting some time alone is really helpful. Another thing that can be do really good is journaling your feelings, just venting and writing down all the mixed up, confused, frustrated feelings that you're dealing with. If you have a friend who is a good listener, who isn't going to take everything personally or overanalyze your feelings, call them up and be like, hey, I need to vent, but please don't take everything I'm saying super seriously because I might feel differently about it later. ENTPs often need to just get their feelings out in order to understand them, but they may afterwards be like, actually, this thing and this thing didn't quite make sense, but I'm glad I just got it out of my system because now I can understand what I was going through and I can understand what didn't make sense. But if an ENTP is venting to you and you're just being like, wait, that thing you said doesn't make sense, or that thing you said is mean, or I'm taking this personally and you're making it about yourself, then it's only going to make the whole situation worse. If you want to support an ENTP when they're really, really stressed, just let them vent and do not take it too personally. Just be there for them, show them you care, and let them process those feelings and redact things if necessary, but don't be making yourself a judge of what they're saying, because a lot of the times as they get their feelings out there, they will start to make sense of things and discard certain things they said that they realized didn't make sense and keep the things that do. Introverted sensing is important for ENTPs. Those grip stress responses can be a sign that they perhaps need to incorporate introverted sensing more into their daily lives. Now, as extroverted intuitives, they don't need to constantly be trying to do introverted sensing stuff, but they need to make little pockets of time every day for that. It could be having a specific morning routine that feels really refreshing physically to you, like taking a 15-minute walk or doing some meditation or flossing your teeth, doing things that take care of your body and your physicality, and creating these small, healthy routines that give your life a sense of safety and consistency. It could be anytime you make a mistake, writing it down and looking for the lesson in that, and then trying to recall that the next time a similar situation arises. So as an ENTP, you do not have to act like an ISJ. You don't have to act like an ISFJ or an ISTJ. That's not going to be your wheelhouse. You're not going to be at your best if you're trying to replicate them. However, you could make friends with some of those types and see what you could learn from their way of doing things, or you can just spend pockets of time throughout the day creating some healthy, simple, small routines that give your life a little bit more stability and consistency. When you're making a little more space for introverted sensing, then you're less likely to have these grip flare-ups where you might overextend yourself and just become lost in details, because you have a more healthy relationship with introverted sensing. And when you have a problem and you're dealing with a problem and you're trying to troubleshoot stress, taking time to look at not just extroverted intuition and brainstorming possibilities or ways out of it, but look at the logic, look at your values or the needs of everyone around you, and then look at your past experiences and what those have taught you. It's very normal for all of us, all human beings, to just go all in on our dominant function when we're stressed to try to solve it. But what we really need to do is look at all the different ways of seeing the problem. And that means looking at intuition, looking at thinking, looking at feeling, looking at sensing. You look at all those things to see what kind of bits of information might I be missing that could help me to manage this situation better. And if you are too stressed to do that, try to find somebody else who might be able to help you with that, who might have a different perspective and give you some insight that you might not naturally have thought of. I hope this has been helpful. I have many more articles about ENTPs on my website at psychologyjunkie.com. If you have any questions, I would love to hear from you. Leave me a comment and let me know. As always, like and subscribe for more videos like this, and I will talk to you next time. Bye, everyone.